Assalamualaikum students, hope you're all doing well. Today in this video we are going to discuss the recent mock paper that you've attempted. I'll be quickly going through reviewing the questions and the answers. Please focus and observe what mistakes have you made or what changes could have been done to your answers. Alright, so this is paper 4. Starting with the very first question, water is a very important molecule for all living organisms. You had to state the name of organs in plants where most water is absorbed. So the organ, this was the most important word that you had to do. Some of you wrote root hair cells, but since this is talking about organ, it could not be root hair cells or any type of cells. So this was supposed to be roots, not root hair cells. Then comes the state the name of the organs in humans where most water is absorbed. Most of you have written kidneys, which was not the right answer. This is small intestine, and whatever water is remaining is absorbed in the large intestine. State one property of water that makes it useful. State one property of water that makes it useful to animals and plants. It could have been any random property. Most of you attempted this correct. It could be hydrates them or is a part of their cells, is a component of the cells in their body. Okay, then comes the flow diagram that shows a town and part of water cycle in it. Alright, for this question, an algal bloom in the water is caused by leaching of nitrate ions. This process was called as eutrophication, and the letter in the figure were either G or O. Evaporation, the simple definition could have written here. Description would be conversion of liquid or water to vapor, and this letter is going to be O. Conversion of water from vapor to liquid is called as condensation, and the letter would have been P. Transpiration would have been H, and it is loss of vapors from plant surface or through stomata. Right now, please look at the diagram. Eutrophication was either G or O. Sorry, conversion of liquid to vapors is going to be O. Conversion of water from vapors to liquid was P. From vapors to liquid was P. Loss of water vapors from the plant surface was H. Right? Okay, next question was, polluted water can be purified at sewage treatment. State one reason why it is necessary to treat polluted water before it is used as drinking water. So obviously the first could have been to prevent spread of diseases or infections, or to remove or kill pathogens from spreading. State the name of gas exchange surface in humans. Now, the part that you had to focus on was they're asking you the name of the gas exchange surface that helps in gas exchange. So that is not lungs, that is alveoli surface. State two features, or it could have been alveolus as well. State two features of gas exchange surface in humans. Any two features. It could have been large surface area, thin, or one cell thick surface. It could have been good blood supply or good ventilation with air. Any of these will be marked correct. Okay, then coming to part B, it says this figure is a diagram of the gas exchange system in humans. Trachea and diaphragm is shown. The question was, draw a label line and the letter X on figure to identify an external intercostal muscle. So you had to simply draw a label line and show this is X, which is external intercostal muscle. Then state the name of the tissue that forms C-shaped structures. These C-shaped structures that you see in the figure, you had to name them, and this is basically the cartilage rings. What is the function of these rings? Most of you did not name this properly, or if you named it properly, you did not write the correct function. So this function that these cartilage rings provide is basically support to the trachea. And the most important thing is they prevent the trachea from collapsing. So every time, if this is the trachea, air goes inside and then air is expired out. As and when the air is expired out, the walls of the trachea would tend to collapse. It would block the airways. To prevent that, these cartilage rings keep the trachea open, wide, narrow at all times. So prevent collapsing, and also allows movement of air in and out because it keeps it wide open, allows movement of air. Right? Write the effects on thorax of contraction of the diaphragm. So the important points that you had to see whenever you attempt a question, please underline the important points. So when you're about to answer, you do not sway away from the main question or the idea of the question. Describe the effects on thorax of contraction of diaphragm. Right? So two things were important here. One of them was increase in the volume of thorax. So this is the difference that the contraction and relaxation of diaphragm makes to the thorax. One, that its volume is increased. Two, decrease in pressure of thorax. So the pressure decreases. This was for 2 marks. And we have this table 2.1. This table compares the composition of inspired and expired air. You just had to name the gases here, looking at the percentages in inspired and expired air. These gases were oxygen, was CO2, and the third one were water vapors. Now this question is which most of you did not properly answer. It says for gas B and C, explain the differences in the percentage shown in table 2.1. So basically, girls, wherever they ask you to explain, you have to reason, you have to give the reason. You do not have to simply explain the table that you're seeing. What they said is you have to explain the differences in the percentages shown. So they've shown the differences in the percentages already. You do not have to show that. Most of you gave the answer writing that oxygen is 21% and it is 80% more than the carbon dioxide that's taken in, or it is like about 6 to 8% more than the oxygen in the expired air. You do not have to simply describe the table. You were supposed to explain the reason behind the difference that they have already described in the table. Okay? So what you had to write is you had to explain that difference. So you simply had to show why oxygen is reducing from 21 to 16 and why carbon dioxide is increasing from 0.04 to 4%. Right? So this question was for 3 marks. So the very first marking point was for mentioning that the cells in the body are carrying out aerobic respiration. So since oxygen is a reactant for the process of aerobic respiration occurring inside the cells, oxygen will be used in the cell, and therefore the amount volume of oxygen that is going to be coming out with expired air is going to reduce, because the body has used it for the purpose of aerobic respiration as a reactant. Secondly, since the same aerobic respiration produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct or waste product or toxic product, it is not used, it is given out. This is what you will see in the expired air, because the carbon dioxide concentration increases from 0.04 to 4%, because the body itself is producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct of the process of aerobic respiration. The 3 marking points were for this. Now next was question 3, part 1. It shows a diagram showing parts of 2 organ systems that are active when a person sneezes. Sneezing is an automatic action that occurs in response to a stimulus in the nose. State the name of this type of automatic action. Any automatic involuntary action that occurs in your body, specifically the sneezing act that they've shown here, is a reflex action. You have to name this involuntary action. This particular involuntary action is named as reflex action. All the ones who have written reflex arc will not be marked correct. Reflex arc is the pathway through which a reflex action is produced. So that cannot be the answer here. Alright, the point 1 shows the names and functions of some of the parts of the human body that are involved when a person sneezes, and letters in figure 3.1 identify these parts. Complete this table. Acha, the first one was cell that transmits an impulse from the receptor to the central nervous system. The very first cell that takes the impulse to the central nervous system, what is that name? It's the sensory neuron. Sensory neuron is the very first cell, right? And the letter, I'll show you the letters once we are done with the table. Secondly, diaphragm. You have to write the function of diaphragm. What is the function of diaphragm? If you've just written it contracts and relaxes, that does not show the function. You have to explain what this contraction and relaxation do. So basically, why do diaphragm contracts and relax? Because it has to change the volume and pressure in the thorax. So this was the main function that you should be writing here, that it changes or alters volume and pressure in thorax, right? All the ones who have written that it contracts and relax would not be marked for this point. All right, then the third one was M. The M is basically CNS or spinal cord. And what is the function? It simply coordinates, if you would have written it, coordinates the entire nervous system or controls all the neurons and regulates body functions or regulates body responses. What is the main function of CNS or the spinal cord or central nervous system? It basically regulates responses, right? Responses to stimuli. So you could have written any of these here to gain marks. Third one was K. K was a neuron, you could see. Here is this. This is K. Now see, what is this showing? This is the sensory neuron that they've shown. This is the motor neuron, and this middle one is relay neuron, and so many of you have not answered this correctly. So this was supposed to be relay neuron. Function of relay neuron is just to connect sensory neuron to motor neuron. Acha. Then function contains cilia. Okay, this function that says contains cilia to move mucus out of the airway. So many of you have written so many different answers that were all wrong. Cilia are present, remember, in the entire respiratory tract. Here they're talking about trachea, in the upper respiratory tract, that includes trachea. So this is going to be trachea, and from the image it was supposed to be this one, P. Relay neuron was K. M was the spinal cord. Diaphragm was N, this one. And sensory neuron was J, this one. Right? This was a very easy question. Such questions and tables are a bonus question for you, so you can easily gain 5 marks. There, they've shown you a diagram of a cell from human nervous system. You can see it's a diagram of a neuron. On figure 3.2, label 2 visible cell structures. Any 2 visible cell structures. Most of you labeled the nucleus and the dendrite. Some of you labeled axon. That was all correct. Many of you skipped this question. It said draw an X on cell to show where receptor molecule for a neurotransmitter would be found. So remember, receptor molecules for neurotransmitters are found at this end of the neuron. So this was supposed to be X here. How the cell is adapted for transmitting impulses. So you have to explain, you have to give reasons why some adaptations or why certain features of this neuron are helping it in transmitting impulses, right? You could have written any 2 of the following that I'm going to discuss. First of all, you know axon is an important part of the neuron. And we studied that axons are long, really long, and the purpose that they're long is to transmit impulses over long distances. So there is a sheet called myelin sheet that covers the axon that makes the impulses travel faster. The neuron has many branches that you can see. These branches are for connecting to several neurons at the same time. These branches connect to several neurons at the same time. That again causes quick transmission of impulses. Then you could have written vesicles. Presence of vesicles are there to release neurotransmitters, so impulse could be moved across the synapse. So you could have written about the presence of vesicles and how they help with transmission of impulse from one neuron to another, from first neuron to another. Presence of receptors only on one end. Reason: unidirectional transmission of impulses. So you could have written any 2 of these, but remember, wherever you see the word explain, you have to give reasons. Whatever it is describe, you have to be specific and you have to summarize. Okay, here, describe how nervous communication differs from hormonal communication. You have to give to the point differences. First difference could be, most of you attempted this right because this is one of the easiest questions. Question number 4 was again for 5 marks, and you could have scored very well in this, but again the issue was that you're unable to interpret what the question is asking you. Again, it says explain, and I just told you, do not forget, whenever it says explain, you have to reason, give the reason. You have to reason your answer. The question says a scientist investigated the effect of temperature. So he's investigating effect of temperature on mass of leaves which are picked from this plant. So effect of temperature on the mass of the leaf. 3 samples of leaves were picked, 3 samples, and the mass of each sample was recorded. At that point, the mass was recorded. And then each of that sample was kept at different temperature for 4 hours. After 4 hours, again, the mass of each sample of the leaves was measured and recorded again. Okay, so what you did, you recorded. So there was a first recording. Then you kept it at different temperatures. And then you recorded the mass again, second time, right? Now, the scientist calculated the final mass as a percentage of the initial mass for each sample, and they have plotted that on this graph, right? So for example, if only 10% of water is lost, they would have marked 90% here for that particular sample, that 90% water, 90% of mass is still there and 10% is lost. So now the question is explain the results shown in figure 4.1. So you have to explain the results. You do not have to describe the result. So if you would start describing it like at 4 degrees, this was the mass, and then at 9 it started decreasing, and then it further decreased. This is description, this is not explanation. You have to explain what is happening. Just see what's happening. When you look at this line graph, you can see very clearly that as the temperature is increasing, look at the temperature axis, as the temperature is increasing, what is happening to the mass? The mass is decreasing. This was the very first point that you had to write. What are you interpreting from this graph that you see, as temperature increases, what happens to mass? Decreases. Okay, first point. Also, girls, do not forget, whenever you explain or describe for both the things, when you're using a graph, try to mention the units at least once in your answer. If you have taken or written about figures here, differences, and about the entire line graph, but you have not mentioned the units once, you will not score mark. So if you're talking about temperature, you can write that as the temperature goes from 10 to 20 to 30 degrees centigrade, write the unit. What happens to the mass? It decreases from itne to itne. You can still give a description, but it could be a simple description, very to the point description. So first, you could have scored a mark for writing that temperature increases and mass decreases. Now explain why is this happening. 1 point could have been by increased transpiration. What is happening because of increasing the temperature? More water vapors are losing from the leaves, so therefore that is increased transpiration. So what could be the explanation for the line graph that you are seeing? Increased transpiration. Or you could have written evaporation from the leaves increases. Or you could have written evaporation. Where is this evaporation occurring from? This transpiration is occurring from surface of which cells inside the leaf? Mesophyll cells. More water is evaporating from the surface of the mesophyll cell. And why is this happening? Because as the temperature increases, what happens? The kinetic energy of the water molecules that are present inside the leaf increases. And as their kinetic energy increases, what happens? They start moving faster and diffusing out of the leaf. And where are they diffusing out from? Stomata. What has this entire thing caused? Loss in mass. Any of these you could have written, you could have scored 5 marks. If this question was as simple as anything, this entire process of transpiration is the easiest concept that we have studied. Teak, so this is what you have to, again, do not forget, I'm saying again and again, wherever they ask you to explain, there are certain questions where they say describe and explain. Then when they say describe, you'll be using figures from here, you'll be using values from the graph, and with that, you'll be saying that, okay, from this to this is happening to the curve, or this is happening to the temperature or the mass. Describe that as well and give reasons as well. But if it just says describe the pattern that you see in the graph, then only description. Use figures from the value, describe what you're seeing in this graph. No need to give reason. Okay? So do not forget this keyword. Okay, then the next question is state one factor. I hope you're able to see this one. Yeah. State one factor other than temperature that would affect the loss of mass from the leaves. So if you increase temperature, that is one way transpiration increases and mass of the leaves would be lost, because when these leaves hold water, they weigh, I mean, the water weighs an amount within the leaf. So when the water is lost, the leaves are going to lose a certain part of their mass. Some of you wrote wind factor, that is right as well. It could be humidity as well. Right? There is a photomicrograph given of a tissue that transports water and minerals, so which means this is xylem tissue. You have to name the tissue, it was supposed to be xylem, and you have to describe how tissue shown is adapted for its function. How is it adapted for its function? So here, what do you have to write? Its adaptation, its features, and their functions. And first, if you are writing that it is hollow, it has hollow cells, it has no cell contents, you will write what function is it serving. So this obviously allows a good flow of water, or reduces resistance to water. If you've written that there are no end walls, like there are walls in a cell, but since it's hollow, there are no contents, there are no end walls between cells. So again, the same, reduced resistance, again, efficient flow, same reason. Another point would be these xylem are very wide, or they have a large cross-sectional area to transport large volume of water. So they're wider for allowing large volume of water to flow. Then another point was the presence of lignin. The presence of lignin, again, to prevent the xylem from collapsing, or to provide support, or to provide strength. Xylem vessels are waterproof. Reason could be they prevent any leakage of water or loss of water from the xylem tube. Prevents leakage. Right? So this was again a very easy question. I'll be only doing until question 4 part C, then I'll be continuing in the next video. Explain how mineral ions enter a plant. This was a very easy question but very misinterpreted. I do not know why most of you wrote the pathway of water from the soil into the plant until it reaches the xylem. That is the pathway of water from the roots to the xylem. Here they're asking, explain how mineral ions enter a plant. Mineral ions, the very first thing that should come to your mind would be mineral ions enter a plant through which process? They do not enter a plant through osmosis, not through diffusion, through active transport. So through active transport, mineral ions are going to enter the plant. Then what part do they enter from? The very cell. Roots, obviously they enter through roots, but roots have cells Roots have hairs, and those hairs have root hair cells, and that is exactly from where the water enters the plant, water and other ingredients from the soil. So you have to mention that they enter through the root hairs or root hair cells by active transport. And then explain, since again it says explain the entire process. If these mineral lines are entering through the root hair cells by active transport, what are they doing? Explain the active transport here. They are actually moving against the concentration gradient. And obviously for moving against the concentration gradient, what is needed? They cannot just simply move. They need energy. You could have written that they need this energy. That is, where do you get this energy from? That is produced from the respiration occurring in the plant, or just write they use energy to do this. And then what else is required? Where is the energy being used? The proteins that are present there. These proteins that are present on the surface of the root hair cells, they allow the mineral ions to go against the concentration gradient. So you will have to mention the presence of carrier proteins also in the cell membrane of the root hair cells. Okay, so this is what you had to mention. This was for 3 marks. Any 3 of these points would have scored you these marks. This was all for right now. I will be continuing this for the rest of the questions, inshallah, in the next video. Thank you.